Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the Fire Emblem big tier list, the biggest tier list, the first one in 2021. And as you can see, we're gonna get started on Fire Emblem 1 today. I almost finished the game. I'm like at chapter 18 or so I feel like I know enough about the game to at least get a head start on tiering some characters and maybe doing some revisions later on to fix things if they're ever like absurdly wrong. But I have an idea of the mechanics and the gameplay feel. Spoilers, it's very clunky. It makes me want to just plow through everything with Marth and Warp, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, someone actually submitted Roger as a character for FE1. Tin Man did that. You know, who else but Tin Man to submit a guy that's literally wearing armor. So yeah, we're tiering Roger, and the same goes for every other character. If one of my Patreons says, hey, please tier this character, I'm going to tier them. And we're going to continue that into 2021. And yeah, we also got FE2, FE3, FE4, FE5, and FE6 today. A total of 20 characters, which is actually over a third of the batch that I'm doing. There's no better way to split it than what I've done here. So let's tier Roger, and then we'll continue on to the other ones. So obviously there's no one else on this tier list yet, so Roger's relative ranking is going to be whack no matter what, but I feel pretty solid that Roger's either a D tier or an E tier. The one saving grace that I would usually grant to Roger in Shadow Dragon, the remake of, you know, Shadow Dragon, Blade of Light, blah blah blah, whatever one is called, is that he can turn into another class, because Armor Knight is just not very good. It's got low mobility and gives you very little offense. Also doesn't help that, you know, it doesn't promote in this game. Like, you have Knights and you have Generals, but one doesn't promote into the other. And as far as I can tell, General's like an enemy-only class besides for, like, Lawrence. So, yeah, you have no promotion. Good luck. And I've also felt like the best weapon to be using in FE1 is generally the Silver Sword, which, I mean, he can use, I guess, if he gets weapon level 4, I literally just remembered that armors have swords at their disposal. In case you can't tell, I didn't really use Roger when I played through FE1. I tried using Draug, but using armors in this game, especially when everything moves so tediously, is so annoying. Like, I wouldn't normally hold this against units in tier list. I don't need it to justify Roger and E rank, I think. But the fact that the game already takes so long and every single thing, like ending your turn and moving unit across something, the fact that that is so tedious makes using units like him more painful. Like, I would almost rather use Wendy in FE6 or Meg in FE10, because at least those games controls feels good, so it doesn't feel as bad to use like slow units. But for Roger, it feels even worse. He's probably not, like, statistically he's probably fine at, you know, taking a couple hits and fighting somewhere, but it's just not worth it. It's just, there's no world in which Roger is optimal except the meme world, except, you know, there is no place where Roger helps you more than any other character. That's basically my point. He's okay at tanking things, and he can sometimes double, maybe, probably, with like a sword against enemy using something heavier, but it's not really worth it. But, you know, we love Roger anyway. I honestly, playing Shadow Dragon and then playing FE1 made me realize just how cool it is that these characters were like all part of it from the very beginning. Like, Roger is one of the first Fire Emblem characters to exist. Like, he predates all these well-known characters from today. And I find that pretty funny. I also think it's pretty cool that he has a unique portrait, because if you look at FE1, a lot of characters are just kind of clones of one another. Like, see how many times you can find Gordon or Dolph and McAllen, whichever one is which, or even Wendell and Boa are the same character. Barst and friends are all the same character. And then he just has his own unique portrait. And I think that's really cool. That's almost reserved to units like Marth and Sita for the most part, or Jagan. I think that's pretty cool. Like, even Kane and Alba are basically the same person in this. And he says like, I'm a generic dude, I'm just a Armor Knight guy, and yet I'm out here with my own portrait. It's pretty cool. Then for FE2, we have 4 new characters to tier on here. We have Boots 42 submissions of Luthier and Delphia. Mo has submitted Pala, and Arkholt submitted Leon. And all these are fairly interesting. Again, my most recent experience with, you know, this region of games, this is obviously Echoes, my Let's Play of Echoes. I have played Gaiden like 2 or 3 times. I've beaten it 2 or 3 times, so I've used pretty much everyone throughout the game, sort of, but some characters more than others, obviously. So you'll excuse my inexperience with some of the more obscure characters like Pala. Who's ever used Pala, right? So Luthier in this game. I feel like he performs very similarly to Echoes. Obviously there's differences, but they have the same feel to them, if that makes any sense. Apparently unit feel is the new buzzword for today, so I'll just use that shamelessly. Thanks Booty Popper, really appreciate it. So what I generally felt when using Luthier is this guy doesn't double anything except really slow enemies like Armor Knights, and he does really well against those because Excalibur at base is just super powerful, particularly potent against Desai in his fortress. I like that it ignores terrain, so he doesn't really care about fortress tiles or floor tiles, any of that bullshit. But I also found that Luthier is just not gonna one round a whole lot outside of Armor Knights, and like unless he gets lucky with the critical. And I didn't really feel like sages were very good in, especially like beyond Act 3, like Act 4. I feel like movement became more of a thing that you want rather than whatever this guy has to offer. Once range is nice, and you know, healing spell as a sage is kind of nice, I guess, but it never really felt like he was pulling on a lot. So he's like some good free utility because everyone's free deployment in this game, but I didn't really feel like it was very good long term. And I don't really like, he has more bulk than some of the other mages, I guess, like Jute, as she used to be called here. That's what she's called in game when you've played like I think the best translation patch we have for Guide. Maybe there's an updated one. Delphia is obviously her localized name. But that's something he has, like a little more bulk, but I never felt like it was enough to survive like a group of enemies. If you think about some part 3 maps where you have like a lot of enemies swarming you, like for example there's this one map after he joins where you have just a bunch of cavaliers and paladins coming at you, and I really feel like it was a safe bet for enemy phases most of the time. You do have the prayer ring at some point, which is pretty nice. I'm pretty sure either he joins with it or Delphia joins with it, I forgot which one of them does, but that can be pretty cool. I think it basically just gives you Wrath, lets you crit at low HP. Pretty risky, obviously, but pretty cool as well. Wondering, he's probably one of the better candidates for it, just because, you know, getting mages to low HP is easy when spells cost HP. But you know, you got to use it well, otherwise he's just gonna die horribly. But that goes for anyone using that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say he's like a C-ish unit, like useful temp, but not a whole lot of availability to begin with, and then not a whole lot of enemy phasing either. So he's pretty alright. But I wouldn't like recommend using him for long term. So I think overall his contributions end up to about the middle, but maybe I'm underestimating him. Then there's Delphia. Now again, recent experience in Echoes, I was actually really surprised at how much I liked using Delphia. When I first made my S tier list, I put her on there and I just kind of put her low, thinking, yeah, on a leveled mage, I've seen this one. But she's actually surprisingly potent at, you know, player phase and, you know, base level. Despite everything, like her magic is really high, aura hits really hard, and what I like the most about her actually is her high res. Like in Guidant, almost no one has res, and the same goes for Echoes. The whole thing about, you know, my Merrick hasn't grown any magic yet, but it's okay because none of the enemies know what a res stat is. That the same is the case for player units. Like Delphia having a lot of res makes her actually useful for fighting things like witches, and especially like what are they called? No, not Cantors, the other ones. Arcanists, basically, dark mages. If you can get her to fight those, you'll end up taking like a lot less damage in the process, and I really like that. She's still promoted very late for me in Echoes, and I have no doubt it would be the same in this game. As far as I can tell, female mages do have an XP boost in this game, but they also promote later, so it kind of comes down to about the same thing. They promote very late, but it's not like she needs the promotion that much. She just kind of wants, like, if she could get anything, it would be better durability, but that's not in the cards really. More HP would be welcome too. HP recovery would be kind of nice. But yeah, I enjoy using her. I enjoy using Aura and Seraphim and all those utility spells. Mage Ring is pretty good in Gaiden, gives like 5 range. I don't know how easy it is to get access to it on her part, because I think Echoes added a Mage Ring actually to Alm's part. I think the only other one you get is like from Celica's route, I think. But you can do some weird cross route transfers of things, so you could get that done. Obviously, she still can't be super high because almost no availability. Like, she basically joins in Act 4 or 5, depending on, well, no, not Act 4, but like very late Act 3. So not a lot of availability. Obviously needs some protection, blah, blah, blah. But if you can manipulate like Witch AI to attack her in Gaiden as well as you can in Echoes, then that's surprisingly useful. So I actually like her almost as much as I like Luthier. I still think Luthier is like, I don't know if I like him better than her, but he's around more often, and he has some pretty good utility himself. When I put him in like a similar height, I think I prefer using Delphia, but I don't know if I can justify putting her higher than him. I also don't know if I can justify him higher than May, considering how because May obviously has like her utility, and then her later utility is like similar-ish to theirs, so maybe she should be a little higher than them. Yeah, I think I want Python over them for, again, higher availability and everything. and pretty good long-term prospects overall. I mean, Bow Knight is a Bow Knight. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with like this. Then we have Pala. I don't think anyone will be surprised for me to put Pala like all the way up here. The only unit missing here is like basically Kathria. You could argue she should be below Silk, which I guess would be fair. But yeah, everything that goes for Echo's Pala I think goes for Guidant Pala for the most part. Really high mobility at a part where no one else really has this to offer. And then Falcon Knights in this game are even more broken than they are in Echoes from what I can tell. The fact that I think you can triangle attack on enemy phase, which is funny. But more importantly, I think the buff that they have against monsters is just bigger in Gaiden, because I think it counts their attack as well as their might, whereas in Echoes it only adds like plus 10 attack per hit or something. It's much bigger here. So Pala has an easier time against things like monsters and dragons and stuff. But it's ridiculous. Like this is like the 5th time I'm tiering a White Wing, if not like the 7th time I'm tiering a White Wing on here or something. There's going to be plenty more, so it's almost hard to come up with new things to say, but Pala in like the Gaiden world is just a new world of ridiculously strong character. Kills everything. A lot of archers that she doesn't even care about. Like, she's still one of the better characters in Desert Fort, and that is the Desert Fort with all the archers. I think that says enough about Pala. She's ridiculously strong, murders everything, pretty over-leveled. She's got like good enough stats to function even in the long term despite being over-leveled. Also, Gaiden doesn't even reduce your XP gain as you're higher level, I believe, unlike in Echo, so that helps too. Stupidly good character. 10 out of 10 would use every time. Ridiculously strong. I think long-term Kathria does surpass her a little bit in both Echoes and Gaiden. I think Kathria has like better long-term speed prospects, but I still always found that Pala can function even in like Act 5. Then we have Leon, the sniper guy, the archer guy, and you know, early on you get these boat maps, and you get some other maps where you just have a couple choke points. Archers obviously shining those because they can almost always attack. Some other units might get themselves blocked off from attacking, or they don't want to expose themselves too much, so they just end up hiding, and then Leon can just take pot shots. And I think it can fairly comfortably promote at the end of Act 2, at least if you're playing on easy mode. I haven't played normal mode in a while, but I'm assuming you can still get into promotion if you want to. Then you have a sniper. Sniper is pretty alright, you know, quite a long range, decent power, and accuracy is like a big problem for these, obviously, because bows feel so inaccurate, and then you got like floor tiles to deal with somehow, or forest tiles sometimes. I don't think he has to deal with a whole lot of forest tiles. Select Route doesn't really have a lot of these, but it does have annoying terrain. But once he goes to Bow Knight, he's pretty ridiculous. It's a high move with 5 range. No killer bow, no hunter's volley in this one, so that's kind of unfortunate. That's one thing that he loses out compared to his Echo's counterparts. So I want to put in like a similar portion of Python, maybe a little higher, because I feel like he has like a better joining situation overall. Maybe I even put him up here, because Python is like, he joins as an archer late into Act 1, so basically the moment he joins, it's almost like when the act is over, so you end up going into Act 3 as an archer, unless you grind him up. But Leon joins as an archer like way earlier in Celica's Act 2, relatively speaking, so he can go into Act 3 as a sniper and have a better chance of making it to Bow Knight in a reasonable amount of time. So I think he requires less work and is overall better, but the reliability issue is still there. I could even see him like go up to B+. The plus and minus tiers are kind of a remnant from back when it was one really big tier list, so right now the gap between some units might look bigger than it actually is, and I actually think I'm gonna merge them after I'm done recording this one, and then maybe put it back together at some point with the S+, S- tiers. But so right now you might see like a really big gap between some of these units, but it's actually not a really big gap. Then we have New Mystery, and lo and behold, we have 2 White Wings here. We have Kathria and Pala, both submitted by P. Vladias. They were actually submitted quite a bit this time around. You're actually going to see more White Wings when we get to Shadow Dragon, but that's going to be a little whiles away. We're doing Shadow Dragon like next episode, and then we're doing New Mystery the episode after. That's just the way the splits worked out. So yeah, Kathria and Pala for FE3, submitted by P. Vladias, in a pair. I think there was actually like one more submission of Pala somewhere. No, there wasn't. I'm confused with something else. Yeah, that's gonna be a thing for another time. So yeah, this is weird though, because this is book 1 and book 2, and they're very different. Like in book 2, these are 2 of the best units in the game, like honestly, like about Echo's level of good or Gaiden level of good. But in book 1, they're like somewhat under-leveled but still good units. They're not like Nino, where they're like really underleveled and really need some hand holding, but they do need a little bit of help to, you know, get up to par, get to Draconite, because they don't start at promotion level, but they're close enough to where you can get them there, and they join like right before desert level where you can train them up. So I'm gonna try to do what they are on like average, because I think that's what I've been doing for FE3 for the most part, is just take the average of their performances in book 1 and 2. But it's going to look very weird because it's not going to be accurate to their performances. So just for the record, Pala is obviously like the best unit in the game in FE3. There's not even like any competition for it. Like just Chris doesn't exist in this one. So I really can't come up with a better unit than Pala in this one. And I think honestly Katria, at the very least, she should be up here, right? Because she joins like one chapter before with still really good bases, good growths, a lot of levels to go that they can use with the star shards to get even better level ups. Star shards are basically just scrolls in FE3. That's really good. So this is what I would do if they were in FE3 book 2, and that's it, like not in FE3 book 1. FE3 book 1, I mostly just put them like B plus, A B plus is probably the right term for like somewhere at the top of B plus or B minus probably, because in that game, once they get to Draconite, they're probably still going to be 2 of your best units. Like Draconites are just that good in these games. They still have the ridiculous promo gains. Flying is still stupidly good, and the enemies are still mostly weak. They're stronger in book 2. In book 1, I think they're pretty weak overall. So mobility is more important than straight up stats. So even if someone like Ogma, for example, ends up outclassing them stat-wise, it doesn't really matter that much because flying, it just gives them like so much more mobility. Sure, there's like indoor maps where you have to dismount in FE3, but those are a minority. I don't think they matter too much in the grand scheme of things. And in outdoor maps, they're just going to fly way ahead. And as far as I remember, FE3 book 1 has way more like outdoor maps than indoor maps. And even in the indoor maps, they're still capable of competing. They don't have as much movement as like heroes do, for example, but they're still able to move like 6 tiles per turn, I believe. And using swords in a way is its own benefit because they're less heavy than lances. So if you average out like an S plus and S minus performance versus like a B plus, you get the units that are like at least 80 tier. So I want to put them like around Sita's level at the very least. I don't know if you can call them better on average. Sita is like really good in both books, so maybe she's better on average because like she's good in Shadow Dragon, or she's good in like book 1 and 2 overall. She joins like relatively early. She joins like a little later than they do in book 2, but like significantly earlier than they do in book 1. So I think this is fair. And then which one of these is better is like I think Pala is the better one in book 2 for sure, because of like the usual level she has. Like Katria is around for like one more chapter, but Pala outclasses her when she joins. And like long term, Katria again usually surpasses Pala, but not by enough to like offset the early lead. And then even in book 1, I think Pala still managed to edge out a lead over Katria. I think she has most of the same leads over Katria that she does. So usually. So yeah, this is probably what I'm going to go with. So we just have 3 Pegasus Knights up here in the A minus tier. And you know, with that conclusion, I think we're just not going to end up having any S plus or S minus tiers for Mystery of the Emblem, because I don't think there's going to be any better units coming in. So maybe there shouldn't have been. Either these should all have been an S tier, or there shouldn't have been an S tier. One of these two things should be true. But either way, that's something I'm going to fix before the next cycle, I think. Because now I got a better idea. Like these are like the best units that could have been submitted, I think. So that I can reach that kind of conclusion. Conclusively. Words. Alright, FE4. We got some Gen 2, and we have 3 Gen 1s. We have Johan, submitted by Adam, as Beowulf, submitted by Zetetic, and then Idean and Sylvia were submitted by JesusKoon69. Still the best name on my Patreon, with some possible exceptions, but honestly none. And yeah, only 3 characters left to tier because we don't have Arion. Just thought I'd give you a sneak peek on that too. Anyway, Johan is one of the 2 X-Bros you can recruit. The other one is Joy Halfier, and he ended up in D tier. I think Johan is the better one by mostly technicality, because I don't really like using either of them. Johan is an X-Knight, so he's mounted. By default, that makes him like better than half of FE4's cast, but this is one of the few cases where a mount doesn't really save him. It just makes him like a mediocre unit that actually gets to see combat, rather than a unit that has good combat but doesn't really get to see any of it because no mount. And that sucks. The good things about Johan is he can 2-hit KO mages with the Brave Axe that you get in the end of chapter 6. So things like killing dark mages and killing like Frege mages, like the thunder mages, can be done. I guess other enemies is less impressive because no pursuits, so we can't even one-round armors. That's like the one thing you would one-round if you did get the pursuit ring. But I don't think he's a very good candidate for it because his combat is very like lackluster overall. His attack speed is pretty low because the only weapon he can really use is the hero axe. And the other axe just weighs him down too much. Hand axe is obviously garbage, silver axe doesn't really add anything. And the other axes are just infinitely inferior, so it's hero axe or bust. And the hero axe alone is not going to save him against like any of the other weapon types that he can't one round without the pursuit ring or any other resources like, I don't know, wyverns, cavaliers, that stuff. He doesn't have one-to range, he doesn't have a legendary weapon. So in the overall cast of AV4, he doesn't really feel very fun to use, he's just pretty mediocre overall. The mount kind of helps, but that's about it. So if you want to think like mediocre-ish mounts, you might think these are Tristan's level, but at least Tristan can use the hero sword, so I still think there's like a significant utility gap there. I think he's worse than Lester and Dimna, and I would argue he's not even as useful as they are, so maybe he should even be like a C tier. Like B for him just feels kind of wrong, if that makes sense. I kind of want to just put him below, I also want to say below Zetetic, because Zetetic is the 11 avatar, so I kind of want to say, like, I honestly think Altena is more useful than Johan overall, and maybe not significantly so. I actually think he might be even worse than Femina in some ways, but that might be too insulting because Femina doesn't even have pursuit herself. So maybe that's going a little bit too far. I do think he's significantly worse than like pretty much all the other mounts in Gen 2. Like I think he's worse than Finn by far as a Gen 2 unit. So I think we'll leave it at here, below Altena. I like Altena a little bit more than I used to, so maybe that's also factoring into it. But yeah, I think he's like about here. Then there's Beowulf, Gen 1 mounted units. Also one of the worst Gen 1 mounted units as far as that mounted units go. But like a little bit better than that. Like he joins like halfway through chapter 2. Pay him some gold and he joins you and you get a free knight. That's not actually free. And he's got okay base stats. Like I once did like a debate, like an actual like character versus character. I'm going to argue my character's better than yours debate, like an Inuit debate if you want to call it that. I defended Beowulf against someone else defending Alec. And I lost that debate because I wasn't very good at arguing back then, but that really made me feel like Beowulf's stats were just not very good. Couple of fun things about Beowulf, I guess. Pursuit is pretty good. Having Pursuit and having swords is just like, if you have a unit with Pursuit, a swords, and a mount, you would think is pretty good. And Beowulf was like kind of okay overall. I think he does lose out against Alec and Noish to a lesser extent because he's just not around for a lot. And in the early games, like when the sword calves are at their best, once you enter Augustria, which is when Beowulf joins, you kind of want to be using lances a lot of the time because it's better against enemies that use swords and lances, which are both present in Augustria. And Beowulf doesn't have a whole lot to compensate. He has a cost for occasional extra attacks, but until promotion, that's it, and the cost itself is not very reliable or good. B-rank swords is kind of nice, but Alec has got a match there. And no A-rank swords, but that's okay. He doesn't really need the silver sword. The most important thing is that he can use the hero sword. And the next most important thing is that he gets promoted, which, like, sure, Beowulf is on a level, it's like level 7 or level 9. I think it's 7 when he joins. And that's on a level, but it's not as bad as, again, Nino as an example. He's not that unleveled. It's possible to have him catch up. He's not part of, like, the shortest path to victory in FE4 or anything like that, but it's not hard to use him either. The fact that he's mounted makes it very easy to both get an attack him and like keep him safe, or even dance for him if you want to. So in that regard, he's not terrible. You can use the Armor Slayer, for example. It's a weapon that no one really wants, that you could feasibly pick up. Stuff like that, he's got that going for him. And when he promotes, he actually becomes like reasonably good. It's not really anything you don't have access to before, like a mounted unit that kills enemies. Like you got like a billion of those at that point. But the combination of Pursuit and a newly gained Adept and like a really huge bonus to speed and skill, like I think it's 9 skill and 6 speed or something dumb like that. It's pretty good. Like he's gonna have almost like a Jamka like skill set once he promotes, so it could be a lot worse. It's just, there's no real reason to do it because he's not optimal, but in his own right, that is a good promotion, and it makes him like pretty competent for chapter 4 and chapter 5. It's just, there's no real reason to it, you know, there's no big reward. Like at least if you train Lachesis, for example, you get something you didn't have before, which is mounted staves. Mounted A-rank staves at that, at a point where Ethlin is going to leave. So that's unique. But for Beowulf, it's just yay, under good combat units. You could still just kill everything with Sigurd if you want to. But in its own right, it is a good promotion. So I think that leaves him like around B- tier somewhere. I just lost him on my way up. Where did I put Beowulf? Beowulf, where'd you go, buddy? Where'd you go? Oh, there he is. He's in D tier. That's a little bit low to you. We will go with, I would say he's more useful than Lester. Slightly so. So I'll put him below Hawk though. I think Hawk is definitely better than him. Maybe Hawk is too low. I definitely think Patty's more useful. Yeah, this feels about right. This seems about right. Still higher than all the other mounted units besides like Altena and Johan, so that's good too. Then we got Idean, and Idean is basically just a staff bot. She's useful in Chapter 1 for keeping Dew alive and healing your other units, and I don't really count recruiting Jamka, but that's one reason you drag her along, so while she's there she might as well heal people. So that's nice. But Chapter 2, I don't think she really should do anything. Like, there's no point in moving her along because 5 move is not enough to keep up with your foot units that have 6 move, let alone your mud units, which have 8 to 9 move, Canto, and a lot more road tile bonuses. I think moving her in Chapter 2 is a waste of time. It's almost like, honestly, between like, she should just stick with Deirdre, like keep them in the home castle together. In a ranked run, you don't even want her to be the one that spams warp into home base to get XP because Deirdre needs that XP more. So in that way, she also almost ends up like under-leveled. But I'm not going to count that against her because A, ranked run, and B, that's just a result of Deirdre's bad availability rather than a problem with Idean herself. But yeah, once Deirdre is gone, you can just like spam warp with her, get it to level 30. This doesn't do anything because she doesn't gain like move or a mount on her promotion, so she still remains a staff bot. Chapter 3 though brings the restore staff and the physic staff. Or actually you get the physic like earlier than that, but Chapter 3 is probably when you put it on her, and she can heal people at range, and that's pretty useful. Her magic is pretty good. So at least in that way she can sort of contribute throughout Chapter 3, 4, 5. Not great because, you know, 5 move is still 5 move, but at least she can do something that's reasonably useful. So for that, I would say she's more useful than some of these characters over here. And at least warp utility is pretty nice too. You can return someone home with Ethelyn or Lachesis or someone else, and then Idean can warp into wherever else you need, which has its uses in like Chapter 3, Chapter 2, yeah, that kind of stuff. She also needs to talk to Bridget to get Ichival or Ufel, which can kind of mess with those plans, but usually I manage to work it out just by turtling all the way to Bridget with her. Or returning Bridget home and then having her talk to Bridget. That's probably easier, actually. So yeah, do that. Don't waste your time. But yeah, I think Idean is like reasonably useful as a utility bot with staffs, but not super great. Then we have Sylvia, and Sylvia's a dancer, so you already know she's going like all the way up here and then all the way up here somewhere. I think between these two is right, because Sylvia's like has more money to work with than Layla, but less than Lina, because Lina's inheritance. So Lina's basically like, she has access to the items that Sylvia gets at the end of Gen 1. So peak Sylvia is what Lina gets item-wise. And that's the main difference between the dancers, like, right? Like, what items do they get? And there's 2 items that they really want, which is the leg ring and the night ring. Night ring is pretty free for them, even if they don't get the leg ring, because the units that need Canto the most are the ones that have to move to use it and have some kind of reason to move again. And most of the foot units in Gen 1 or Gen 2 don't really want Canto because it doesn't give him a whole lot. But for dancers, like, every square is so meaningful that having them dance is nice. And then if they get the leg ring as well, that's when they really start popping off. Like, dancing for 4 people at a time is so good that unless you're trying to solo the game with Sigurd or Selef or just trying to LTC it, giving the leg ring to your dancer is almost always the right move because, I mean, why would you not want Canto and 9 move on your dancer and dance 4 people at a time? That's so busted. Like, between 4 mounted units and your dancer, you can literally kill like 8 people in 1 turn. It's insane. As long as they won't kill enemies, of course. But like, do 8 actions in a turn. They can revitalize someone's turn, even if they're like a restore user to cure some status stabs, or a healer, or you can return more people home, or attack with really powerful units like you know, Sigurd, and just kill everything. Like, it's so ridiculously powerful. And it can be hard to use if you don't have him keep up, but you do have the means to keep her up with the leg ring at least. Affording it is a bit of a problem with Sylvia because she doesn't have that much money, but you do have Dew. You do have Dew to give her some money if needed. She can get some money through the arena because she's Miracle, and there's no Sleep Sword in Gen 1, but Miracle alone lets you manipulate your way through fights if you know how to. It's very tedious, but it is worth doing if you want it to be as good as possible. Funnily enough, one of the few units that doesn't make it to level 30, even in ranked run usually, unless you really put work into it, because her arena performance is that bad and she's never going to fight anything. So dancing only gets 10 XP, which is not a whole lot, but that doesn't make her any less useful. It's just getting money on her can be kind of difficult. But yeah, that's FE4 for you. Only 3 people left. Apparently Iraz here still somehow. And then we have Hannibal and Corporal. We're not going to tier Arion. So that's all we have left for this one. We also skipped Thracia because we're done with that one. Except for 1 character. 1 character is still left here. We still have Alva waiting over here, chilling over here. And that's funny. I think I remarked on this last time, but when I was doing my FE5 Iron Man, I was trying to get Deathless Iron Man FE5 done. And Alpha would be a traditional character to leave behind when I was escaping Chapter 19, just to unlock Chapter 21X, the chapter where everyone who's in prison ends up being. And I made a tradition to have Alpha be left behind for that. Because he's not exactly a guy you miss, you know, he's basically like Kain. I discussed him like a couple episodes ago. One of the very few units in Thracia that's I feel like is just not very good or worth training. You can still do it, and it's still like better than a lot of other quote-unquote bad characters in other Fire Emblem games, because the growth that they have is quite good. Like, he's a Lance Knight, he's got bases, but then pretty good growth. So between that and scrolls, he can get by if you want him to. There's just no reason to, because in Thracia, utility is more important than combat. And for the combat you do have a lot of units that are just really good at it at base, or at base with like a couple of investments. Whereas these are more traditional growth units that just need to be raised up from the ground up. But they don't really have a whole lot of like specialty to them. They have like okay Pursuit Critical. I'm saying they because he and Kain are very similar. And they have like, I think one of them is like D lances, and the other one's D swords, and then vice versa. E rank lances, E rank swords. And yeah, it's not very good. You need more than that. But on the flip side, I once did a run of FE5 where I trained everyone to 2020, literally the whole roster, and they ended up the best of them all because, you know, arena abuse plus scroll abuse is Prunus Incarnate. They ended up capping like everything. Maybe not HP, maybe it didn't get 80 HP, but it definitely got like 20 in every other stat. Besides maybe magic and res, or well, it's the same stats, so besides magic. So that was pretty cool when they did that. But yikes. There's a reason we call him the Scrub Squad. I'll put him over Kain for his leaving behind utility. This guy was submitted by Sir Thylal, by the way, so thank you very much for that. Now, let's just move on to FE6, because we got a lot of FE6. So, it is FE6 time, and we have the following characters waiting to be tiered. Booty Bopper submitted Igran. Leonie submitted Faye, aka Chicken. We have Reed submitting Elfin. Modern Mind submitting Lina. We have Autistic Biden submitted Sophia. We have T-Class45 submitted Wade. Michael Kraus submitted Kath, and then Hugo submitted Douglas. So thank you very much for those. We have a lot of Nevada inhabitants in this one. We have Igran, we have Faye, we have Sophia. I guess I should say Arcadia inhabitants. I thought it was kind of funny. This is also like over half of the cast that we have left of FE6, speaking of which. So my most recent experience with FE6 is actually Project Ember, but I do remember how these characters play in FE6 vanilla mostly, so I'm going to try not to use my Ember experience too much. So Igran is like an upgrade to Klein that you get. Despite the fact that Klein gets hard mode bonuses, Igran has a better basis for the most part. The only thing she's missing is his bow rank. Other than that, you know, B rank bows are still pretty good. As long as you use the killer bow that she joins with, she's pretty much fine. I remember her doubling being fairly consistent, not everything, not mercenaries, not some of the faster enemies, but something like a cavalier or an archer or a mage will probably double. One routing sometimes, like unpromoted enemies usually. I don't remember for sure, but I think she has the numbers for that. Pretty good against wyverns, obviously, because they are weak to bows, so that's pretty good utility there. And generally, if I'm playing through FE6 and trying to do it somewhat fast, then Igran ends up being handy for a couple chapters. This is a filler because I wouldn't have a full team of like trained units, so she'd be better than most of the alternatives I could deploy. And that alone is pretty useful. It doesn't last forever. There's some point in FE6 where I just stop deploying Igran. But I think I put her in that tier for my FE6 guide where it's like, alright, you want to deploy this unit for a couple chapters, you should, because they're pretty good at base. So I think she's on the same level as Klein, basically. Useful for a couple chapters, but for a different amount. Like Klein is most useful for like the Etruria chapters, the Western Isles chapters that are left, whereas Igran is more useful for the chapters that she joins after. So I don't really think they're like, I think Igran is better overall because she works better late in the game, like actually late in the game, but I wouldn't be offended if anyone put Klein over her because he joins earlier, so availability matters too. So I think it can go either way here. I'm just gonna like keep her here for favoritism, for favoritism reasons. I like Igran. She's pretty good. Not obviously like a massively good character because I mean C tier is still C tier, but I would still recommend almost anyone use Igran for a little bit. Then we have Fe, and funnily enough, I think Fe is a character you should not train because she's pretty useful status bait, and she can't really do that when trained because her res ends up so high that they don't end up going for her. But a base level Fe that you put at the deployment of your, like at the bottom of your deployment order, she can bait like berserks and sleeps and stuff like that all day. Not silences, they don't target her. But sleep and berserk is something that will like almost always go for her. She can bait boltings too, because her base HP is so low that the enemy will think they are bringing her to low HP when she's already at low HP. So she can mess with the AI quite a bit at base level, which I think is really funny. As a unit to be trained, not great. The big problem for me with Fe is, I mean, obviously like 30 uses Dragonstone is not great. It means she only fights like 30 rounds of combat max. She doesn't double usually, so that's not really a factor. And then she's so slow that she doesn't double. That alone is a problem, because it means you're probably not one-running anything unless you're O-calling, but she usually doesn't. A lot of people recommend, or used to recommend, you train her no matter what because of the final chapter where she's forced in. And I see the logic behind that, but I've never been able to get behind it, because if Fe is so bad in the early chapters that you don't want to train her, then you don't really want to like put up with that kind of bad combat for a while just to have her be useful-ish in the final chapter. And then in the final chapter itself, I think she needs quite a bit of training to start 1-KO Manakets on hard mode. I don't remember how it is on normal mode, but I think it's like quite a ways away. She's effective against them, but she's still not enough to get like to the ridiculous threshold you need for 1-KO. So I generally don't recommend training Fe. I do recommend using her though, because the things she can do are pretty unique, and especially the high resistance that she carries, like Dragonstone at base gives such huge res bonuses that it's like kind of a waste not to make use of it. When Fe6 is so filled with annoying status stats like Sleep and Berserk again. And even if she does get hit, you can just restore her, but the chances of her getting hit are pretty low. They're like 1 RM, but they're usually like somewhere in the 10s or 20s, because you know, really good res and long distance, they can go a long way. But yeah, if you do use her though, she's very fun. I do remember her being useful in Ember, and obviously her animations are worth seeing at least once or twice, so you should definitely give her some kills just for the novelty of it. But yeah, I think she's pretty useful, and I wouldn't hesitate putting her like here. She's pretty unique utility, and I don't mind her being like B-, maybe like more useful than Lu at least. Just because, you know, with no training, she's pretty useful. It seems kind of low, but her availability is obviously like not great. So there's got to be something that's got to give. I could put her a little higher though, because I like her better than these mediocre units, so maybe like around here. Better than, I do think she's better than Noah and Thea at least. Pretty useful. Then there's Elfin, who I consider to be the base same unit as Lorem, so I'm just going to put her where I put him at the end of this. And, you know, Dancers, I mentioned it before, but they're pretty useful. I think Fe6 is one of the better games for these, because it's a difficult game with a lot going on in a lot of chapters, especially the busier chapters, like chapter 16 and chapter 11 in the A route. And in those chapters, I think you really feel the impact of a Dancer. Sometimes in Fe7 or even Fe8 or like Fe9, really any of the more, like easier games, you can sometimes forget how useful a Dancer can be because you just don't need the extra actions. But in a like tight game like Fe6, Dancers just like are just standout units, man. I'm just gonna like straight up put her in S+ tier, along with Lauren right here, because every extra action you do sort of counts, and even if it's just a rescue drop, but especially when it's something like a restore use or an extra heal or an extra attack within your bending units, you really feel the impact of a Dancer. Between these two, I think they're pretty much similar. There's probably some differences in stats, but they don't matter. All that matter is they have 5 move, they're fragile, you need to protect them, but the dancing is always worth it to do. And it can be hard to utilize. I emphasize this when I do like the unit guides, the character guides. If you're having trouble keeping them alive, then something like an Angelic Rope can really help to, you know, survive a bolting or like a stray attack that you just kind of forget about. They're not the easiest units to use, but god, they're useful. And usually for tier lists, you kind of have to assume like a competent player. If you use like an argument like Shanna's bad because if you attack like a fighter with her, she just dies, and that's like, yeah, that's true, but that shouldn't really matter. Like, and then, you know, you can take that to extremes. You can assume that someone is like super competent and knows exactly what they're doing turn by turn for the whole chapter. So you kind of end up rating someone's planning rather than, or like someone planning at max potential rather than how good a unit is intrinsically. I try to be a little bit less extreme. I kind of assume both like low turn count playthroughs, efficiency playthroughs, and just someone playing the game. And sometimes I think the better a unit performs by a more you know, average player, the better they are. And for some cases, I think that works. Some like Milady, for example, she's pretty hard to use wrongly because her stats are so strong that she ends up being like brainless. Like for this reason, I think Seth is one of the best units ever created because you can almost do no wrong with him. The only mistake to make with him is just not using him, as far as like wanting to use a good unit is concerned. With these, it's a little trickier to rate them because obviously they do have their flaws, and when they're exposed, they seem really, really bad. But I still think the dancer utility in the tier list philosophy, they belong at the top. I have no doubts about that. Next up, we have two really underleveled mages, level 1 mage and level 1 shaman. Lina joins in chapter 8, which is a little late for level 1 units, but I get what they were going for with the unleveled princess thing. And there was a time that there was a lot of people out there defending Lina as a unit, saying she's better than Lu because her magic is much higher, she OHKOs enemies, she one-rounds mana keys using a fire tome, one-shots things with 4 blaze, and she's not hard to train at all. What are you talking about? You just weaken enemies for her and then she gets the kill, it's easy. And the point is always, it's always easy to train unleveled units, but it is rarely optimal. It is not something you have to do, and it makes the game usually harder on yourself because you're slowing down to accommodate a unit. That's what it always comes down to. Can you still do it? Yes. Does it work? Is it satisfying? Yes. But that's not the questions that we're answering with a tier list or a character guide. Generally, the question you're trying to answer is like, okay, which of these units trivialize the game the most? Which of them are the closest to like the perfect unit? In Fe6, there's like no real perfect unit. These all have their flaws. But like, who's the closest to Seth? And Lina is about as far as you can be from Fe8 Seth or like Fe9 Titania as it can be. A unit with low durability, low offense, fairly low reliability too, because her base skill is so bad. She gets held up by fire, but generally her accuracy is like kind of eh. So yeah, constant need for protection is a really big downer on the tier list. She still, funnily enough, has a role in low turn count playthroughs sometimes, and Irissa has this low turn count playthrough on its YouTube channel where he beats Fe6 in lowest turn count possible with no 100% growth. It just rigs his way through Fe6, basically gets the lowest turn count he can, and he trains Lina because she gets attack supports and she can bolting people from long range. You can buy bolting tomes in one of the secret shops, and that's actually useful for saving turns, because if you can kill the boss with bolting, you don't have to warp her in as a boss killer, or at least not as far. So in that way she saves warp uses, and by saving warp uses you save turns. So there is a reason to use Lina, but it's only in rigged context where you make sure she gets as much magic and speed as possible. But yeah, Lina fun. There's also another LTC run by Igran, I think is how you pronounce it. He's a French YouTuber, but he commentates in English, and he's doing an Fe6 LTC run right now where he's training Lina. I'm assuming she has the similar utility there. It's like a low turn count run, but he's just allowing deaths, because then you can do like the death drop thing, where you have a unit carry Roy around, and you have the unit suicide on player phase, and that will allow Roy to be dropped on the same player phase and be used, because if you drop someone normally from like a regular drop, they cannot move again, but if you kill the unit that's holding him, he can move again. I'm pretty sure it's a glitch, but it works to save turns if you want to, but obviously you have to sacrifice units to do it. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's Lina's used in faster playthroughs. In slower playthroughs too, she's like fun to use too. So let me think. I think she's like a D tier unit. I wouldn't say E tier because of like the fringe utility of bolting. But I think at the very least she has to go here, and maybe she even has to go here because at least Bolton, like, yeah, she doesn't have any free utility per se. So I think we kind of have to go with E tier here, because it's easy to think of Lina as like a turn-saving unit in like rigged context, but I'm trying to keep in mind like normally Lina would not have those levels of speed that she does in those playthroughs, not even levels of magic. She's not guaranteed to get magic every level up, which she kind of needs considering how like underleveled she is. So yeah, very fragile. Maybe putting her like in this tier is fine. I don't know. Like long-term Ds are obviously worse, but like for the most part I think you have to put more work into her than into Ds, and these have like some level of utility. It comes down to like, how do you want to rate units based on like how good they are for a couple chapters and then just bench them, or do you want to rate them based on like how they could turn out in the long term if you really like committed to using them? And I think that determines like how you rank like these two units, these three, among each other. Sophia though, I think there's like no argument whatsoever to putting her higher because her stats are just that terrible. Again, I trained Wendy in an Iron Man. I had a fun time. It wasn't very good. She turned out well, but she wasn't good at all. And that was doable. And I looked at Sophia and I'm like, geez, this is like using all the worst parts of using Wendy, but with one to range and like even more underleveled and even worse accuracy. And Wendy's accuracy was like insufferable, like 50s to 60s on everything. was just plain awful. And Sophia pulls like 40s to 50s on enemies. She's a higher chance of missing than hitting a lot of the time. It might be the desert terrain that gives 10 avoid, but I have such a hard time hitting stuff with Sophia. She actually caused the death in one of my Ironmans. I was trying to meme a little too hard, trying to kill a hero with her, and I ended up putting like Roy and Cecilia in danger, and I ended up having to sacrifice Saul over it. It was very stupid. But yeah, I would never ever recommend someone use Sophia. The one reason I can think of to rate Sophia higher than this is if you counter getting the Guiding Ring in the desert, which is more of a tier philosophical question, or like a tier list philosophy question, than like anything about her utility. And I've equated it to a thief getting a chest before that only they can get, which but it doesn't really quite work like that. I kind of changed my mind on it because like right now I'm thinking, well, you know, you don't have a choice in that matter. It's something you're always going to do regardless of your choices. You just have to walk Sophia over there and she gets it. So yeah, and in the same sense, you can't really give Chad credit for the chests he get in this chapter, in chapter 3, because he also like force deployed him. So it's really weird like that. I think I made like a bit of a video on it in like the Wade versus Sophia debate that whoever the person who submitted Wade, I think, or Sophia referenced. It's really interesting to talk about. This is not really the place for it, but it's kind of funny to think about. Like, do you actually give her credit for doing something that every single player is going to do, regardless of whether you're training Sophia or not, whether you're using Sophia or not? Does it matter if she gets the Guiding Ring or not? Because you just walk her to a tile and she picks up the Guiding Ring and that's it. Like, there's no choices to be made there. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird. But yeah, level 1 dies to everything. She does bait status stabs really well in that chapter, but it can be annoying because she doesn't have the high res that Fa does. So she ends up getting put to sleep because she's lowest in deployment order in the desert chapter, and because she's force deployed. So yeah, gets put to sleep a lot, or gets silenced a lot too, from what I remember. It's like a blessing in disguise, because I don't mind her being silenced. I never attack with her anyway, but her being put to sleep makes it annoying, because it means it makes it harder to defend her sometimes when you want to move her along with the rest of your party, or yeah, so I would usually still restore her if she gets put to sleep, but I don't cure the silence if she gets hit by silence usually. Then there's Wade, and I put Wade pretty high on my character guide, higher than I wanted to in retrospect. I put him like I should have put him in high effort and ended up putting him in like the good short-term thing, the okay thing. I do think he should be in like kind of high effort kind of unit. I should be below Lot for sure, but I think it's like reasonable that he's like a tier below Lot. So I'm probably going to end up putting him in D tier. His attack power is pretty high, but he has issues doing just about everything else. Like, he doesn't double because his speed is terrible. He has like unreliable hit rates against anything that's not a soldier or an armor knight, and even those he can miss sometimes, because Axis and Fe6 are just that epic, and until promotion is not going to be fixed, and he gets like bows and a skill bonus, and that kind of helps. The promo bonus in Fe6 is really good, but before that, big issue. And the only like other way to save him from that is like a support with Lot, and if he doesn't get that, then his attack bonus, like his accuracy is just so bad, and then his defensively is not great either. Like, his HP is good, but his defense is low, and he gets doubled a lot of the time. There's like Cavaliers in chapter 4 that double him already, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't go up from there at all. I do think it's fun to like support Lot and Deke and Wade together, because they give each other like, if they have a support triangle together, they actually give each other like 25 avoid, as well as a bunch of defense and attack bonus and hit. Not full those, but like plenty enough to where it's significant, and they can build it pretty fast. Like, sure, Deke can get the support bonuses anyway from like supporting Rutger and Clarina, but those are very slow, whereas these supports are pretty fast, and Fe6 especially, that's like an exception. Usually supports aren't that fast. At the very least for reaching C and B. A takes a while, obviously, but you only need a lot weight A support. Also needs a hero crest, and those are kind of tight. Like, he's not getting the first one because that one should go to Rutger, and then there's like better candidates all around for the second one. You're probably not using that many of them. I generally have it free for them, but I think for a lot of casual players, the hero crests being competed over by Lot, Wade, Fear, OJ, and Deke, as well as Geese and Gonzalez, is a bit much, so that can be an issue too. So I would put him like at the bottom of D, I think. I do think Geese is better because I think like a trained version of Wade isn't all that much better than a base Geese, and Geese also has access to Berserker class, which I think is significantly better. But, you know, depends on your perspective, I guess. Wade does have early game utility though, so I think it actually, in a way, you could put him like over here too. He's a bit better than that because he has like chapter 2 to be useful-ish, although chapter 2 is mostly carried by Deke rather than Wade, so maybe I'm like, yeah, actually, And then it's chapter 3 where he kills like a couple soldiers and that's it. And that's after that he's like completely worthless basically. So actually, yeah, better than OJ, but I think I'm gonna stop there. Also, I'm gonna move Ellen up a bit. I think I underrated Ellen a bit. I think her staff utility is better than what I gave her credit for. Yeah, I want to put her like closer to here, I think, for now. I think this is more fair. She's still not a great like staff user or anything, but you know, just the ability to use staves and being an early game healer when you don't have that many of them is more useful than what some of these units bring to the table, I think. So that's a quick revision I wanted to make. Then we have Kath, a thief. This is a unit a lot of people just like straight up put here because I already have 2 thieves, but I think in her case it's not too fair to do that because she can do this without being in combat. Like Wendy and Sophia, they have to fight if they ever want to be useful long term. And I'm putting useful, like quotation marks are doing a lot of work there if you were to put them around that word useful. But Kath, when you're raiding chests, there's not really a difference between using Kath and Astor. The main reason I'm rating Astor like a bit higher overall than some of these units, I don't remember where, yeah, he's at the top of B right now, B minus. The main reason he is here is because he's also useful in combat, but once you get Kath, he and Chad are probably like, or she and Chad are probably like roughly equal in stats, and the main difference between them is just, well, one of them has higher availability, but that's it. And once that's over and done with, like once you're in chapter 12 and you're recruited Kath, there's no reason to use one over the other, and they do the same thing. Whereas there's going to be a big difference between Wendy and Boris, for example, once you've used Boris for a couple chapters, because raiding chests doesn't give you XP, and nor does it need to. You know, raiding chests by itself is useful, and being able to steal by itself is useful. And if you think about the context of like what we're thinking here, if you think like Iron Man's, I would say Kath is a pretty big help to Iron Man playthroughs of Fe6 because it's pretty likely at some point that one of your thieves is going to get struck by bolting or something and just roll over and die, or get hit by an axe somewhere and die. And in those cases, you're going to be happy to have a third thief available somewhere. And also, I'm not going to count against her that she's like an enemy, that she steals stuff as an enemy, or like opens like doors and chests you don't want opened. That is something that's, well, first of all, it's in the player's control. You can make sure that she doesn't get there in time. And second of all, it's something she does as an enemy and not as a player character. And I'm rating characters based on what they do when they're blue. So I'm not going to count that against her. Some people recommend killing Kath at the first appearance. I really don't recommend that. At the very least, choose free lockpicks for you, right? I always make sure to steal a lockpick from Kath. Even if you're not using it, they sell for some gold. And gold, as you know in Fe6, means boots. So yeah, Kath steals stuff. Obviously her stats are terrible, but she doesn't need stats to be okay. I'm still gonna put her like kind of low because she's like the last thief to join, so she has the least amount of exclusive treasure. But you know, there's nothing wrong with an extra thief somewhere. So like the top of D maybe seems that fair. I don't know if that seems fair, but we're gonna go with that. And last but not least, we have Douglas, one of the biggest memes of Project Ember, so I'm going to try to stick to Fe6 vanilla. Douglas isn't great in vanilla, but he does have bulk at the very least. His HP is high, his defense is high, and his strength is high. As you're going to guess, pretty much everything else about him is pretty bad, including his move. So magical durability, not great. Hit rates, not great. Locked to lances and axes, so the hit rates are not going to be great. But he does survive enemies, and that can be useful in like some contexts. He's a pretty okay free deploy if you're stacked for options or if you haven't raised that many units, and for that reason I think he should be like the bottom of C or like the top of D somewhere. I think like he's not super useful, but he can help you without any investment, and you know, there's always some kind of use for high durability. His con is too high to like really carry him around with a lot of people, so, and there's no reason to either. You'd rather have someone with actual offense to be carried around. So I wouldn't like count on him for getting to the trade there, but you can block choke points. There was like this one memorable moment I have with Douglas in Donut's Fe6 playthrough, the 0% growth run. He actually got Douglas up to the left switch in chapter 22, the Zephiel chapter, and this guy took 8 hits from a Brave Sword hero, and I think he like killed him with a Brave Lance in time to just take that switch by himself. Like I don't think there was any other unit in that room with him. Maybe like it was warped with someone, I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure he just did that by himself, and that was pretty impressive when you think about it. That was a base level Douglas doing work in chapter 22, and that will always be in my memory. So yeah, Douglas is a champ. He's useful for something, so I think it's fair to put him like around here somewhere. Not a terrific unit or anything, but you know, there's some free utility there, kind of like with Wade. There's some things that you gotta do. There was this like really old strategy that obviously had never been tested, where people were like theorizing Fire Emblem more than they were actually playing it. on like the old debate boards, and they were like, you know what, Douglas can do this thing, right? You got this like part in Sakay where there's like a non-nomads around and you're just afraid of Roy dying. So what you do is you pick up Roy with Douglas and you walk him to the gate, and that way you can seize it without him being at risk, which is pretty difficult to do because the moment you drop Roy, he can still get attacked by enemies. And if you think about like one of those chapters where to be like near the gate, you have to be in range of like a trap with a bunch of nomad troopers coming out on enemy phase, you're still gonna get attacked somehow. The only way you can prevent that is by warping in a dancer, or by you're probably just gonna have to like use a dancer. So you're probably using a warp staff to just get that done. And if you're using a warp staff to get Roy in there, you don't need Douglas at all. So it was pretty superfluous, but it's just one of the things I think of whenever I see Douglas's face in FE6. But yeah, that's the FE6 units. Let me go over what we have left, alright? So for FE6, we have Dorothy, Barth, Dayan, Yuno, Yoder, and Karel left. And that's only 6 units. I put Larm up there? Yeah, I did. Okay. So those are left. For FE5, we have nothing left. We completed this one, so this one's going to be out next time. FE4, we have these 3 left, so Ira, Hannibal, and Corporal. We're not tiering Arion. FE3, we still have like quite a lot left, so we don't have to worry about running out of those. Same goes for Gaiden, we still have like quite a few left, although a lot of these are NPCs, so like about half the cast maybe. And then for FE1, we have like everyone left, so keep an eye on those. Don't forget to submit alternate picks if you're not sure, but it's probably easier for me if you just picked like units that haven't been taken yet. So make sure to Control F through the threads to make sure you're not missing anything. And yeah, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for all the support, all of you. Appreciate it. And until next time, when we're doing some what's next? FE7, and probably FE9, FE10, and Shadow Dragon. Peace around. Goodbye. Love ya.